Welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is. And I had an awesome conversation with Andrea Vinyard. We covered the gamut of all those crazy mistakes we made in leadership. She's been in a number of very high level executive roles in very different settings. And we really dive into her experience of conscious leadership, staying above the line, but what does it actually take to be able to do that? What does it look like? And how has she taken those lessons and helped other leaders to show up in ways that are going to be much more effective? But it really is a battle. And this conversation goes into the nature of that battle, and how what kind of hard lessons we both learned in being able to be really aware and careful and intentional about how we're showing up in leadership roles and the mistakes we make when we're not intentional. So I know you're going to get a ton out of this episode. Welcome aboard. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is, where I get to interview really high-skilled, super awesome leaders, usually C-suite roles, and they tell us the real truth about all their experiences, the problems they faced, and when they were the problem. And today, I'm so excited to have Andrea Vinyard here. Andrea, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Meg.
And Andrea, you have a super interesting career trajectory. I'm going to let you give us the backdrop, but you're, like we talked about, you're kind of like living the cat lives of a career. You've had all these really interesting and winding roles and very senior leadership roles in starkly different environments. And you've kind of pivoted your career now into coaching and developing other badass leaders. So give us a little bit of your trajectory.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. I do find it funny when people let me know I've had a career of about 1,000 lives, which is not necessarily wrong, but it's been really fun. For about the past 29 years, since I graduated from college, I have done a wide variety of things. 22 years of those were spent active duty Air Force, where I was a medical service corps officer. So think administration, operations, all the things that make the hospital work. And I did that at every level, all the way up to CEO and commander of a large group in the Air Force. Retired from the Air Force in 2018 and wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. The Air Force had exposed me to a lot of different things, from quality and patient safety to running businesses and logistics and finance. And so I had a great opportunity when my husband and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, to go work at a children's hospital. So I got to go work at Phoenix Children's and absolutely love that. And so, great transition from the Air Force where it was all about purpose and mission. Going to Phoenix Children's was the exact same thing. I had a chance to be the administrative director at Barrow Neurological Institute, where I had 7 different divisions, and ran an institute really focused on kids and making them better. And so that was really cool. And from there, I went on to be the chief operating officer at Cigna Medical Group, which was transitioned after I left to Evernorth and has been recently sold from Cigna to a local healthcare organization here. And most recently, before I started the Vinyard Group, I was the president of Optum Behavioral Care. So had a really cool opportunity to build inside a Fortune 4 company, which is not something everybody gets to do. So we were working on outpatient behavioral health inside of Optum, United Health Group's patient services arm. And so that was actually amazing. And so spent 4 years buying and fixing and building, and it was a really great experience. And just recently, as of April 1st, opened up the Vinyard Group, which is really focused on coaching, facilitating, and even doing some executive retreats. And so that's been absolutely amazing and gets to pull all of my experiences together into one.
Awesome. Thank you. So, um, you had senior leadership roles where you, as you mentioned, you kind of sometimes had to reshape, rebuild, grow, not just status quo or coasting.
Yeah.
Most of the
Those are
roles
never
that you've
options,
taken,
unfortunately.
yeah. Are they ever? I
No,
mean,
not
yeah.
really.
So, you've definitely taken on some really ambitious roles, and you're not someone who shies away from difficult things, especially considering your trajectory in the Air Force, right? So,
Mhm.
can you tell us something that was like an unexpected difficulty or something that was really hard in an unexpected way, particularly like on the people side? Maybe you shifting into a different sector and kind of recognizing something about a culture or some sort of people problem that kind of caught you off guard.
Yeah, there's a million of those too, right? And I think, people are our greatest asset, and they're often the things we forget about because we forget they change management has to apply to everybody, right? It's not just the problem. The people are a big part of that. And no matter what you do, whether it's in the military, and I'll actually give you a military example. Because I think people think in the military, we can just tell people what to do and they'll do it, no questions asked. I would actually tell you sometimes change in the military can be a little bit harder because unlike in the publicly traded companies and in the private sector, we don't have bonuses that people get. We don't have a lot of carrots, we have a lot of sticks. And so being able to talk to people and lead people through change, I think can be sometimes a little bit more challenging, even than people expect because of that. And so my last couple of years in the Air Force, we had a couple of really big changes to do. Um, and they were kind of directed top down. And so instead of though thinking about how they impacted every person, because it was some significant structural changes, some cultural changes, we kind of plowed right through those. And I have two examples, one that went really, really well because I think it was needed and people saw what we could do with that. But the other one was not necessarily change for change's sake, but it was some structural changes that hadn't happened anywhere else. And so we were kind of shifting how things were done. We moved some resources around, but we didn't necessarily take it all the way out and understand the second, third order effect or how it would affect people. And I will tell you, there was a huge resistance to that. Um, so what I've learned over that time is when you start to think about changes and you start to do that, how do you socialize it? How do you over communicate it?
Mhm.
And really bring the team along with you versus just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and here's how it's going to work. But really and truly bringing the team along, having their buy-in and listening to their voice because sometimes the folks and the individuals at different levels have some amazing ideas that I think sometimes we forget to ask about
Mhm.
and they can actually shape how the entire organization looks.
Yeah, nice. I had a coach of mine who I was talking about this big change I was going to implement. And I was so excited and it was going to like open up all these opportunities and really ease things. And I was super pumped. And she was like, you know that you're the only person who's going to be excited about this.
Yeah.
And you've got to shift gears and figure out how to bring people along with you.
Mhm.
Um, and you can only be excited and infectious and inspiring to a certain extent before people are just like they're always going to look at what's in it for me.
Right.
What am I
Right.
going to have to face and change and struggle through? Because change is threat.
It is. And it doesn't matter I think we forget that it doesn't matter how small the impacts of change, the impacts of grief still show up, no
Yeah.
matter how small it is, no matter how amazing it is for them. Um, and I will counter what I just said with in my last role, we had an opportunity, we had to do a lot of changes for a lot of different reasons. And they had to be really fast.
Mm.
We ended up going in a totally different direction where we, came up with metaphors about hiking mountains and everything we did had a mountain behind it. And we gave examples. We over communicated to the point people are like, okay, we get it. I'm like, well, I want to make sure everybody gets it, right? And so, but it was just such a different impact and it impacted about 8,500 people across all 50 states. And so when you learn those lessons, and sometimes you learn them the hard way, I think how you show up
Mhm.
in new situations really makes a big difference
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Often it's not what we're doing, it's how we're doing it.
That is exactly right.
So, in talking about people friction,
Yeah,
I'm curious. Another very depressing quote that you hear is strategy or culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
every
So when
day.
you're the strategist and you're goal setting and you're excited, and then someone's like, culture is going to drag this all down and flush it down the toilet, right?
Yeah.
So you've had to come in and implement these changes and set new goals and milestones. Can you give me an example of where culture held you back? There were just sort of those little micro behaviors, attitudes,
Mhm.
interactions that were really hurting the momentum of a change you were trying to implement. And what did you do to address it?
Yeah, I think that's everywhere. And I don't think there's any one situation that happens. I think culture eats strategy for breakfast no matter where you are, right? No matter how good the strategy is, no matter what you're trying to do, change is hard. Culture change is even harder, especially when you have people who've been in the same place for years and years, and they're the glue that hold the organization together, right? That's the important part. Often as leaders, we come in quickly, we're there 12 to 18, maybe 24 months, and then we move jobs. And so that culture is sometimes the part that's there. What I find is that as a leader, it's how do you show up? Are you engaged? Are you present? Are you going out to visit the clinics that no one really wants to visit, right? In the middle of nowhere. When things aren't good, do you show up curious or do you show up and push people's buttons to say, why did this happen? Not, how did we get here and how do we move forward? But are you showing up? I've been on an airplane before in less than 24 hours because of something that happened at a location in Florida. I live in Phoenix. Less than 24 hours later, when I heard about it, I was on an airplane, rented a car, drove a couple of hours, and said, okay, let me see what's going on. And then how do we fix this together? That's a very different way to show up for culture than it is to point from far away and say, you need to fix this, you need to fix it now. And oh, by the way, why did this happen versus showing up, I think, in a very curious way. One of the things I love as a leader is thinking about conscious leadership. And I think, we often have the choice of playing the victim or we have an opportunity to show up. And regardless of what happens, how do we get through it? One of the great things I had a chance to do in the Air Force was partner with some other folks on developing a medical incident investigation. And so very similar to how the FAA does it, there's a legal investigation of everything that happens, but there's also a personal side of what happened. Let's look at our processes. And in the Air Force, I had a chance to build that. I had a great mentor and leader who asked me to participate in something. And then we said, hey, this is actually a really cool way to do this. Let's go, before anybody looks at anything wrong, let's go take a look at like what caused this, what culture was set up, what happened that people got really not lackadaisical, but they got complacent, right? They started doing things because someone said, oh, there's a shortcut, but they didn't understand all the reasons that the process was in place. So I had a chance to build that new culture and that opportunity to do a look inside of why things happened and what happened and say, how do we fix this? And so I was the first non-clinical person to lead a team like that and had an opportunity to go to the Surgeon General of the Air Force and say, hey, we need to do some things differently. And here's some recommendations we think that could be implemented tomorrow. And so how do you now start to change lives? But people see that, hey, something happened and it wasn't, we're going to fire a bunch of people. It's how did we get here and how do we really change the things? And so when I think about that, I also think about the positives of when there's an opportunity to change the culture. Again, how do you bring people along? How do you talk about that story? How do we as leaders show up curious? Because sometimes we don't. And that can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. You hit a real hot button of mine when you said conscious leadership.
Yeah,
So I don't know if you've read the 15 commitments of
I
conscious
have.
leadership.
I've even
Yeah.
done some of their training.
Okay. Yeah. So this is paradigm changing for a
That's
lot
right.
of leaders to go and making it very simple, above the line, below the line,
Mhm.
right? And I was just doing a retreat with an executive team where they really clearly defined what was below the line for them,
Yeah,
and what they wanted to be above the line. Like, what
I
really
love
does that
that.
look like for their company and their sector? And I was checking in with them, and talking about how's it, we've made these new commitments, right?
Mhm.
But you're gonna have to like be really conscious and intentional, or
Yeah,
gravity's gonna suck you back into all the old ways of being.
it's
Um,
easy.
it it's easy, and we tend to be creatures of habit, and especially when we're stressed, that threat response of, oh no, change, oh no, things aren't working,
Right.
we devolve back into old egoic patterns, those old ways of doing things that make us feel better, but don't actually address things in the long term.
Right.
So that it's like this psychological gravity sucking us backward unless you're conscious and fighting forward from it. You're going to devolve backwards.
It is, and it's so interesting too. I use that a lot when I'm coaching about do you show up curious or do you show up in the victim? And it's kind of funny because I have a few clients that'll be like, I'm above the line, and I'm like, oh, that's so great. And like, so it's like a physical thing too, right? Like you can
Yep.
feel yourself being the victim and kind of pulled down, and then you can feel yourself being pulled up. And so they'll kind of laugh. They're like, I know what you're doing. I'm like, I know, it's great, but you
Yeah.
remembered it. But it's also important to remember that we vacillate, right? Like all day, you can go above and below, and the choice is yours on being able to recognize that. And that's one of the things I love about, coaching people is you're going to have bad days and you're going to have bad moments. It's recognizing that backfall. It's recognizing when you're being pulled down and taking control of that and saying, that's not where I want to be right now. Right now, I need to show up differently because that can make all the difference in the world sometimes when you're stressed, and sometimes that below the line really happens when we get stressed. How do you think about curiosity and playfulness and go, how do I come above that so that I don't get stuck in that same pattern over and over again? And it's really hard,
It's
right?
hard.
It's really, really
It's
hard,
hard, but it's like building a muscle. I say
right?
like intentionality is like going to the gym with your brain, where
It
you're
is.
building
Absolutely.
that muscle so that your default and your second nature ends up being the healthier thing with more ease.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like to ask people is what really needs to be true for you to show up more curious than you are right now?
Hmm.
And that's a question of, oh, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that. And I was like, okay, but that's a question for you to pose to yourself of what needs to be true for you to change? What needs to be true for you to move forward? And it makes people think a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's ownership, right? Things aren't happening to me, they're happening by me or through me.
Right.
So that all plays into emotional intelligence, which I'm obsessed with. But
Yes.
the below the line behaviors are people not managing their emotions well. Bottom line, they're feeling stress, threat, right, angst, and they drop below the line because of that. And if you were totally masterful in your self-management,
Yeah.
you would never fall below the line, right?
Yeah.
So when and emotional intelligence is pretty much the not pretty much research has proven over and over it is the predictor of your success in a leadership role.
Correct.
The way the leader comes into the room affects everything else, and if
It
you
does.
come in below the line, then that's okay for everyone else to go there. If you're curious and hopeful, other people will elevate to curious and hopeful. So a lot of the leadership that we've all experienced is low EQ leadership, unfortunately. So when you think about bosses you've had, or other leaders you've worked in tandem with and observed, what are some of those behaviors that taught you, I don't want to be like that. I need to be different.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really great question. And sometimes I say we learn more from the leaders we don't want to be like than the ones that sometimes we do, because sometimes what they do is so easy, it's hard to pinpoint. Um, and I wish I could say I'd been a perfect leader my whole life, but I haven't. We all learn over time. I think it all comes back down to trust for me. And how do you build trust with your team? How do you trust people to do things differently than you do? Because sometimes that's where the better idea comes from. And when I think about bad bosses, it's all come down to people who don't trust their teams, who don't trust their people, and they already have an idea of what they think has to happen or wants to happen. And instead of trusting people to do it and do it right and say, okay, that's right enough, right? We got to the same point, but how we got there may be very different. That's what it boils down to. And, we've all had those bosses that I can pinpoint and tell you stories about forever. But I've also had those bosses where they did trust, or they trusted me, right? They may not have trusted everyone, but they trusted me. And I know how I thrive in that environment. And so when I think about values, when I think about what's important to me, one of those is I like autonomy, but you get autonomy by trust,
Mhm.
right? And so when I've had those bosses that have trusted me, it has been absolutely amazing. And when I have had those bosses that not only didn't trust me, but then they take that one step further and they didn't trust their leadership team, that makes it really hard because now they want to do everything, which then slows it down, which then frustrates everyone else. And so there's a second, third order effect. One of the books I love the most is Patrick Lencioni's The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And if you want to get to that accountability and those results that you're really looking for, that trust has to be there. And I always think about my last team I had when my last role. Our team, especially our core team, was awesome, right? And so there was a group of four or five of us that met every day, and not because we didn't trust each other, but it was like there was so much going on, and how do you do this, and how do you do this, and who's running point on this because I can't be there, but you got it, so you go, and then we would just check in. But what we were able to do in that short period of time too was amazing because we made some really big changes. But that trust was at the bottom of all of it. And so, I still have the pleasure of getting to work with some of these folks in different capacities now, and it's really fun, but that trust is still there. And so, even now, what we're able to accomplish together and in small groups is really fun because you still see that trust and you kind of still see it moving things forward and moving people forward.
Yeah, Andy, linking trust with momentum is so critical. Like people don't understand how slow you're going to move if you don't
Oh,
trust.
horrible. Yeah. And then then you have to double check everything. And then there's extra meetings and there's extra products. And yes, things may not go as fast, but I think, it's just kind of this recurrence of my career, right? I've been working now for 29 years, and it's just amazing that it doesn't matter the situation, again, whether it's the military or academic medical centers or for-profit companies, the same behaviors change. And then I'm going to go back to what we were talking about, that below the line, above the line, because when you don't trust, you start to pull people down. And instead of showing up as their best selves or as their best leader, sometimes they show up now below the line. And so it's this cascading effect. And so, again, if I could give, leaders of any age and any part of their career advice, it's how do you build that trust, and how do you because then you empower your people, you give them that autonomy that they seek and desire, but you're also able to now to free yourself up to do more as a leader and really look up and out and across versus always drilling down into the organization, which I think is so important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, um, we can just keep singing the same tune and like cheer each other on. We're like on a shared soapbox here.
Yeah, no, but I think it's important, the questions you're asking, right? I think it's leadership is hard. And I think, there's some drums I like to beat because I think they're important. And I wish I would have learned them earlier in my life. I wish I would have known about conscious leadership 15, 20 years ago. I wish
Mhm.
I would have known how important change management and bringing people along with you were 25 years ago, right? Like some of that is it's there, but I think some of the details of it haven't been there. So yes, we can keep doing that, but I do think it's important to hit on that some of these are the big things, even though they seem little, they're the big things that make a difference to people.
They're the most transformational things and they're the most overlooked, right?
Yeah, right.
So let's get specific too.
Yes.
So
All right.
when people have low emotional intelligence, they're unconscious, they're just sort of in that automatic thinking or survival mode. That's where we make the big mistakes.
Right.
We drop default back into old ways. And we have to be able to look at what does that look like in me? Because it's going to be different. Meg being her lower self is different
Yep.
than Andy doing it. And so you have to be able to look yourself in the eye and say, this is what my ego looks like, or this is what my defensiveness looks like, and this is that person. I actually have a lot of my clients give that person a name
Oh,
and de-identify with it, right? Like there's a version of me that's really controlling and manipulative and can do it in a way where I look nice and try and trick you, but I'm still trying to control you, right?
yeah.
So that person I don't want to be anymore, and I have to be able to recognize when I'm sliding into that really, really
Mhm.
clearly. So, what are some of those behaviors for you that you've seen where when you know you're sliding below the line, like what's your flavor of that? What are the specific
Yeah.
behaviors or inclinations that you try to avoid?
Yeah, we're gonna call her Stella. Um, but it is interesting. Like when I start feeling like I am below the line, that victim mentality shows up really hard for me, right? I feel like I'm not enough. And I'm a coach, right? I know the answer to this question. But it's like, oh, why did they pick me to do this job? Why am I here? Why am I the person fixing that? It becomes an I, not a we, not a they, not a us. And the more I focus on me, that's when I know I am sliding below that line, because it doesn't become about what can our team do to fix this. It's why am I the person who's getting blamed for this? And I mean, I can slip there in a hot second. Um, and I actually have a post-it right under my screen that you can't see that has a big thick line on it that says make a choice. And that is something that's really important to me as a leader. I think, being a leader, I think is a privilege and it's not something everyone has an opportunity to do. But when you are a leader, it's a privilege and you should take it like that. It's not something that you just get to do. It's something that someone has given you an opportunity to do something more. They've seen something in you that maybe you haven't seen in yourself. But when you, as a leader, start slipping below that line, you start creating this environment of negativity and you start spiraling. And like you said earlier, other people do too, because they take that as a signal that this is how I can behave,
Mhm.
or this is how I can misbehave because my leader is berating other people. My leader is tearing down others. And I think sometimes we as women do it really poorly. More so than others, but others do it as well in different ways, right? You become passive aggressive.
Mhm.
um, you start this, people mirror what they see. And so if I show up in a meeting and I'm cussing and I'm arguing and I'm blaming instead of taking accountability and taking control, then others see that as that they're able to do that too. And I've walked into teams where that was the case, where the leaders disliked each other so much that the team started pitting each other against each other too. And it was not a way to operate because then it wasn't, you didn't get this assumption of we're going to make a difference, we're going to make a change. It was, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? You're the reason this is failing.
Mhm.
And then you know what? Those two leaders left, and suddenly it's like the teams actually get along, and we actually started moving things forward. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. Um, and so, but it is something that I have learned, and I've learned the hard way. I talked earlier about one of my values being autonomy. When my autonomy is questioned and my independence is there, I will slip below the line very quickly. But that's why this piece of paper is there, is because I look at it a million times a day. And so I know as soon as I slip down, that I have to make a choice because my job is one that doesn't allow me to do that, right? I mean, think about our coaching. I mean, that is a place where I have to make a choice, but I also ask my clients to make a choice when they show up to they're in it, right? They have skin in the game, whether it's through their company or they're paying for it themselves. But when I show up to coach or facilitate, that's one of the things we talk about is I want you to make a choice. Which side of the line are you on today? A, so I know. But B, so you know what you're getting and you know what you're going to walk away with. And I think that's really important. So
I
Stella doesn't have a place in my life unless I let her in, but I really try to keep her out.
Yeah, sometimes my Stella just tries to reach over and grab the steering wheel while I'm driving, and it's gonna happen. You've got to be aware. You got to know what she looks like.
Right.
I was gonna ask you, how have you built your self-management so
Mhm.
that you can, and I think your tip of you need something visual right in front of you. You need to know exactly what triggers you
Yes.
so that you can predict it. Those things are so important in being able to manage those intensities and lo the below the line behaviors in all of us.
Yeah, one of the things in my coaching practice I really work on a lot with people's values. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of times that misalignment and when those values get challenged, when people um, show up differently than their values, that will often be when you go below the line. Knowing, like you said, knowing what those triggers are, I know that I can go ride the bike, I can go take the dog out for a walk. Getting outside and getting away from this and this picture, this screen is a big way for me to reset myself too. If the line doesn't do it, even a couple of minutes of just walking outside and walking around the backyard for a few minutes will also reset my brain so that I can come back in and do what I need to do.
Yep. And movement is a really good way to process adrenaline and cortisol, right? Like anytime you feel angry, frustrated is just a flavor of anger.
That's
When you have that anger, you got to get the chemicals out of your body, and movement is a good way to do it.
right.
Change scenes, walk around, come back, clear your mind, because when we're experiencing anger, our IQ just keeps dropping and dropping the more emotional we get.
Right.
So, so, you know the saying, sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and
Yeah.
you've clearly done a lot of work and intentional self-reflection and growth. So, can you give us an example of one of those key learning moments for you when you realized I can't keep showing up this way? Like, what was the situation? How did it kind of get thrown in your face where you went, oh my gosh, this is not working for me. I've got to make a change.
Yeah, it's actually one of those things that you're like, oh, I wish I'd have learned that so many years ago. I don't know that I knew it in the moment. I will tell you, I think it was about a year and a half later.
Interesting.
But I talked about a big change earlier where we were restructuring some things where it made some people very angry. There was a lot of angst. I'm losing power. I'm losing resources. And it did set well. It didn't set well with a lot of people because it was such a big change from an organization. And the sad thing is this has happened to me more than once in my career, so it's not any one job. Um, but when that change happens and no one's recognizing what's going on, you don't recognize it. I have a great picture of what change looked like, and it's like a pinball that's going all around, like grief, all around the change curve. Um, and you can go there a million times a day, right? Like something will trigger it. It's like, "Oh, well, I'm losing this." Well, are you really losing this, or are you gaining something different? But you forgot to see what's right. You only focused on what's wrong. Um, and in one of these situations, it was about a year later where I'd gone to a class and I was sitting there. I was like, wow, I showed up like a real jackass. And I was one of the people in charge. And I'm like, I actually reached out to several of my direct reports and just said, I'm really sorry how I showed up. I didn't realize what was going on in the moment. This is what I'm now reflecting on, and I just want to apologize because that's not what we as leaders do. And one of them wrote back and was like, don't worry about it. It was a big change and this was going on. I said, yeah, but you need to know better. And more important for me, it's I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed for how I showed up. I'm embarrassed for what this looked like. And that's one of those things that you kind of take forward with you that no matter what the situation is, there's an outcome on the other side. And being, I think, a leader talks about that, right? A part of that's your strategy, part of that's your vision, but it's also having the EQ to know that you're not the smartest person in the room.
Hmm.
The smartest person in the room may be the brand new person who just showed up, who's never worked in your organization before, but they also may be the person who's been in your organization for 45 years. And because they've seen a bunch of changes, they can say, hey, and I hate this phrase more than anything, if we've done this before. I'm like,
Hmm.
great. Now my question is, tell me why it didn't work.
Right.
Not, okay, thanks. But it's tell me why it didn't work before because we have different people, different resources, different a lot of things.
Hmm.
What caused it to fail from your perspective, and how could we attack this differently? Because something has to change.
Hmm.
So if it's this is what we think needs to change, why did it fail before versus immediately shutting that down because they said, well, this isn't going to work. And I think it's being open to more people and more ideas like that. But yeah, I've done a lot of work in the past, probably 8 to 10 years on my leadership style, and I mean, it's never going to be perfect. Um, but boy, it keeps me up at night. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I start looking at what did I do that day? How could I lead differently? Because tomorrow's not going to be easier. It may look different, but different challenges are going to show up, different opportunities are going to show up. And so, how can I show up better than I did yesterday is always a really big question I ask myself as I close out my day.
I think that that's a really important thing to consider when you're looking at your own growth and just maturation as a leader, as a human, is any forward progress
Mhm.
is that's all we need to do. Like I'm exactly where I should be if I'm stretching myself a little bit, right? And I think we tend to get really bogged down in even shame and guilt. I should have done that differently. I don't know if I'm enough for this. When really, and we create these crazy visions of who we think we
Yeah,
should be, and that's not how this stuff works, right? Trying to improve ourselves to be more successful, more effective. It's just look at the little baby step I can take. What little
absolutely.
shift can I make and stick to that and watch what happens? Feel the momentum of that and then make one more little shift. But don't try and eat the whole elephant in one bite.
No, I joke that you should eat the elephant from the trunk so it can't continue to grow. And my husband's like, no, people like elephants. They're cute. Don't ruin that for them. But I always talk about that. And I also think a lot about stubbornness, pride, and ego. And those get in our way, every single time too, right? And so I think it's remembering to think about your day from a point of curiosity versus I have to win. Because if your people lose, it doesn't matter what you as a leader gained, they still lost, right? You still showed up poorly for them. You still showed up poorly for the people you're trying to take care of. And so, again, I think that curiosity plays a big role. And then having the self-awareness to reflect on, with curiosity on your own, of how you continue to grow and show up differently.
If my team feels like they're losing in order for me to win, you
That's
may
not
get short-term results, but in the long run, you're outrunning your punt coverage. You're going to be way out there ahead of people, and they are not going to be supporting you because they won't trust you.
yeah,
Every time they show up, it's like, well, she seems to win and I'm losing. I'm losing my autonomy. I'm losing my creativity. I'm
right.
losing the ability to problem solve on my own,
Yeah.
right? Then they're not going to trust you.
Right. And we've talked about trust, but that to me is, how do you build it? How do you get to know your team? How do you know when someone's struggling and they don't have to tell you, you know your team and your directs well enough that you can say, "Hey, you're not showing up like you normally do. How can I help you?" And pulling them aside, right? How do you know what story you're telling yourself to say, "Hey, you're telling yourself the story. That's not what I believe at all. How do
Mm,
we reframe that so we can shift that version of you to what I know you can be?" Um,
nice.
and
Yeah.
that's a really big piece too.
And I think you and I have had to do that for ourselves as much as
Mhm.
others. Right? So I'm curious. I have a challenging question for you. You've already done all this growth. You're constantly working on yourself, but what do you think is that next area of growth for you to really be kind of optimally fulfilled by your work, be really influential in the way that you want? What is this next little hurdle for you?
Um, So it's kind of interesting you asked that question because I've actually been focused on that a lot lately. So in this next role, in this next chapter of mine, I call it chapter three, is well, so we had chapter one was the Air Force,
Air
chapter
Force.
two was I started with grad school and then kind of jumped into public sector and academic medical work, which was really interesting. And chapter three is about kind of what am I looking to do? And so I have my coaching business where I get to continue to give back, right? Service is a big piece of me. It has been my entire life. And so now with the coaching piece, I think it's continuing to serve, but serving others in a different way, more from an accountability and thought partnership way, and pushing them maybe in ways they didn't see how they could be pushed.
Mhm.
I think I also am now I've started some board work, which I really like. So getting to challenge myself, if I'm not in charge anymore, how can I use my expertise? How can I advise? How can I be a partner and a coach to that CEO and the other board members so that we can continue to improve that business? And so that's been an interesting growth piece for me in the past probably 8 months.
Mhm.
It's really thinking about how do I leverage my thinking differently in order to support what others are doing in a way that I can truly partner with them. And so I think even my own personal transformation, going from doer to um, maybe more of a support role, but having a strong voice and continuing to lead, but just differently, that takes some adjustment as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like when we're taking a major shift in our whole role and positioning ourselves and the way we influence the world, then we've got to really stretch ourselves
Mhm.
to show up in different ways. And when you're used to being in a CEO type position and being the doer and being the one who puts out the fires and makes the
And the one
decisions,
who's 100% accountable and responsible is it's really hard, right? My husband and I are kind of doing this together. There's a book I love, and I have no financial um, worth to this person, but I've probably sold this book more or given this book out as a gift more than it's called Couples That Work. And it talks about really dual income couples and how you partner together through, the first chapter is kind of everything's amazing. Second chapter starts to look a little different, right? Like people are getting promoted and there's children involved and there's moves and there's all these things that kind of jumble your life. And then chapter three becomes when you as a couple now start to spend a lot more time together, whether you're retired, you're empty nesters. But being able to have those conversations in chapter two about resentment
Yeah.
and about what, I mean, that's a big one, right? Of you moved us across the country and I lost my, I heard it, I was on a trip recently and someone made the comment, it's like, well, so and so moved me 24 times in 30 years. And I was like, okay, but look at you. You have a great business and this is what you've been doing. And like, I'm totally in awe of what has been created. And it's this, oh, there's still a resentment here that needs to probably be, talked about. But my husband and I have actually read this book multiple times. We've kind of read it through chapter. But now that we've kind of both entered this next phase, which we spend a lot more time together, we're adjusting. But how do you talk about that so you're both getting what you need professionally, personally, but also mentally, right? And physically, how do you work through that? And
Mhm.
so that's been a big part of our transition, is making sure we're able to talk about those things as
That's
well.
so interesting. I've seen over and over in so many of my friends, family members, colleagues, coaches, the importance of that primary relationship,
Yeah,
right? And the health of that relationship. Are you getting the support you need at home, but also are you getting challenged?
yeah,
Like we've got to help each other grow, but we've also got to be there for each other in different ways as we evolve. So
right.
I'm excited about that book.
You should read it. It's great. It also talks about connection, right? And so we just did this big road trip, which we loved. But we spent 2 nights with most of the friends we visited along the way. And so we got a chance to connect with people.
Yeah.
We got a chance to see what their lives look like. We got a chance to be a part of that. And it was really important to us to start reconnecting with people that matter to us, as we kind of head into this next chapter too, which is awesome.
Oh, well, that is a perfect bridge to my last question for you, which is that time machine question. I'm going to put you in a time machine and send you back to talk to yourself 15 years ago or so.
Okay.
What is the most important advice you would want to give yourself?
The most important piece of advice. Be present and curious. And I think, I mean, we've all done it, right? We've been in meetings, we've had the BlackBerry out, we've had, that ages me right there. We've had the cell phones out. We've been so many other places that we haven't let ourselves be what we need it to be. And too many things going on. And I think if I would have told myself to be present and curious more than it was important to win or be right, again, I don't regret a lot in my life. I've had an amazing career. I've had an amazing life. I've been very fortunate. Um, the hard work has paid off. But I also wonder what it would look like if, Andy Vinyard 20 years ago would have said, wow, you know what, this is amazing versus I want to win. And, I don't know that I would have done it differently, in all honesty. But I do wonder what would have changed.
Well, your experience of it would have been different,
Yeah.
bottom line, right? Less stress,
Yes. Yeah.
more
Yeah. Maybe.
appreciation. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, so much wisdom packed into just a few minutes here. So, I'm gonna have to re-listen to this and digest. I really appreciate everything you've shared, Andy. That's just a lot of wisdom from the trenches, from military, corporate world, all over the place. So, thanks for sharing all the wisdom you've gotten and all of your different lives in your career.
Of course. Thanks, Meg. Thanks for the opportunity.